You're listening to the Vocabit Podcast, where I help students improve their vocabulary for the SAT, ACT, and life itself using my unique and research-backed story-based method. On this podcast, I'm sharing the best tips and tricks for a more enriched vocabulary and pain-free test day. Hello, and welcome to episode 55 of the Vocabit Podcast. I'm Erica Abbott, a former English and history teacher, the author of the young adult novel Ahead of Her Time, and the founder of the eponymously named vocabulary company Vocabit. Just a few episodes left in our writing mini-series, and today I'm sharing two pieces of advice in the same sentence. There's a vocabulary word for that, by the way, zeugma. Just learned this word, Zeugma. And it's when one word is used two different ways. So he was fishing for walleye and compliments, or I held my breath and the door. For this one, it's is your subject your subject? And while it doesn't follow the same pattern as the ones I mentioned, I'm not playing with the verb, I am using the same word in two different ways. I'm talking about subjects, big and small. So first, is your subject big picture? If you've been listening to this writing mini-series since the beginning, you know that I decided to change how I'm narrating book 2 because I realized that my subject, Noor, is no longer the only person with a really compelling story. This was really brought to my attention in Save the Cat Writes a Novel, where the author, Jessica Brody, encourages people to really consider their subject before they dive in. She talks about one of her writing seminars where a woman was writing a story about someone whose husband was killed by an assassin or something. And she thought that she was writing it from the perspective of the wife. But after really thinking about this, she realized that the far more interesting subject is the assassin, and she decided to write the book from the assassin's point of view. Now, obviously, you need to tell the story that resonates with you. I'm not saying that you've picked the wrong subject. But it is worth taking a second to envision your story from a few other perspectives before you dive in. And if you have the same experience I did, where it just immediately clicks that someone else's story might be just as interesting, it's worth reevaluating your subject and potentially even telling your story from a different point of view. The second piece of advice nestled in that is your subject sentence looks at the word subject from a more micro perspective. I learned this piece of advice from Rick Riordan a few years ago, not in person from his website, but he points out something that is so obvious when you say it out loud, but it's really easy to overlook. This piece of advice can apply to creative writing, but it can also apply to essays, emails, business proposals, you name it. He talks about how the subject of your clauses should be what you want your reader to focus on. So instead of "it was a beautiful day," where the subject is "it," a word that doesn't really conjure a clear mental image, a stronger sentence would be "the sky was a beautiful blue." Now you have people picturing the sky. He continues, if you're writing a sentence about a guy named Fred, the subject in the sentence should be "surprise, Fred," end quote. When I read this piece of advice, I was writing a silly little story called Isis versus Isis. I had my students writing their own myths at school during our, I think it was Ancient Egypt unit, and they were so good. They inspired me to write a mythology-based story myself, and some parts of this story, I actually got the ideas from them. They were so good. This was a few years ago now, but I still remember how I tweaked a particular sentence to follow Riordan's advice here and was almost thunderstruck by how much more interesting the sentence became. The original line was something like, as the gods took sides in the Trojan War, we shall do so again now. And similar to the "it" sentence Riordan gave, we shall do so again now, the subject of that second clause, is pretty weak. Pronouns tend to be weak in general because they can stand in for so many things. I couldn't figure out a way to replace that pronoun without sounding repetitive, though. If I had changed it to, as the gods took sides in the Trojan War, the gods shall do so again now, it just sounds kind of awkward. So I flipped the focus of the back half of the sentence and made mortals the subject. And the final version was, as the gods took sides in the Trojan War, the mortals will once again have immortal allies. So now, instead of we, the focus of the back half of that sentence is mortals, which is a really strong and unique word. Now, to clarify, I'm not anti-pronoun. Your sentences will get really strangled really fast without them. But in a sentence that you want to carry a lot of weight, consider using a stronger word, even if that means messing with the subject of your sentence a little bit, like I did. If you really want to take it to the next level, Cicero, the famous Roman orator, widely considered one of the best public speakers of all time, would make sure that that word carries the most impact possible. In his famous speeches against Catiline, this guy who was basically trying to take over the government from the inside, Cicero starts with, "How long will you continue to abuse us, Catiline?" Not, "How long are you going to keep doing this, Catiline?" This being a kind of weak and vague word. Not, "How long will you continue to play these tricks, Catiline?" Tricks being a word associated with jokes and humor. Instead, he chooses, "How long will you continue to abuse us, Catiline?" And think about how much more weight that one word carries and how many other words he could have chosen. So today's topic, is your subject, applies both to the big picture story and your line-by-line writing, particularly in sentences that you want to carry a lot of weight. That's all for today. If you have a second and don't mind, I would really appreciate it if you left this podcast a 5-star review in Apple Podcasts or wherever you're listening. I really appreciate them. And as another thank you to Vocabit members, I'm going to add the entire ISIS versus ISIS story to the members area. I'll include a link to it in today's accompanying article as well. Everyone can read the article, but only members will be able to read this vocabulary boosting short story. If you want to sign up for a Vocabit membership, you can do so at vocabit.com. That's VOC and then Abbott, like my last name, ABBETT. I would love to have you, and the membership is a great way to take your learning to the next level. Thank you so much. I will see you on Thursday.